It has been several months since I made a video because lots of different things have come up, which I might share a little bit about. But anyway, the thing I really wanted to talk about was about transparency and ethical conundrums in the helping professions, right? So I will lead by example. I am not a fully qualified counselor and I am calling myself one because it is an unregulated profession. And you're right, that is a very dangerous thing, but there's also, it's not a thought experiment because this is real. So I'm from Singapore, right, which was colonized by the UK. Um, and I mean, obviously we've become independent now in the 60s, but you know what colonization means. It means they came to our lands and they did a bunch of things to our people and our cultures. They extracted resources. That's the whole reason they come to all these places, right? And then they benefit from our knowledge, develop all these universities, and then charge us basically three times the amount they charge home students to benefit from the same amount of higher education. And this is just for a bachelor's degree. And I think most people would say that to be, an ethical practitioner in the psychology field, which arguably, well, I think it makes sense to consider counseling a psychology discipline, even though they're not like one and the same. Um, so I just think it's fascinating that, okay, also because they've benefited from all this knowledge, they're farther along in understanding and diagnosing autism. Meanwhile, my country is kind of still scrambling and catching up with the British understanding and American as well, because let's not forget, obviously, that some of the colonizing British became Americans. Um, so I guess that's where I'm at, really. I think it's fascinating, this expectation that I've had to somehow pull together all of this by myself to be able to pay three times the number of home students whose ancestors colonized my ancestors and benefited from our ancient knowledge and then rebranded it as a bunch of bullshit because it wasn't reached through science, which is what's extremely valued right now. Now, don't get me wrong, I always say this. I think science is extremely valuable. In fact, personally, the way I choose to look at it, right, being a spiritual person myself, I like to view science as a spiritual practice. And this would rub a lot of scientists the wrong way. Like, what the fuck do you mean? Like, it's supposed to be objective. Like, ugh, don't bring your woo woo shit into this. Like, I'm sorry that I want to approach science from a heart centered place. Like, to me, that's all spirituality means, to approach something with heart. Because if you don't approach science with heart, with ethics, then you end up with the fucking bullshit that you ended up with, like the fucking Milgram experiments, right? Or the Stanford experiments that we cite all the time in psychology. And so that's what I always talk about, the integration of science with spirituality. It's not talking about woo woo principles, which in the first place, like, why are you so threatened by it? Like, this is something that turns me off so badly about, and don't get me wrong, this doesn't turn me off science, right? Because science is, it just is what it is. It's a beautiful, objective, the closest thing we can be to an objective practice. And I think it's incredibly necessary. Um, But when scientists are so afraid of the metaphysical, the spiritual, and they're like, oh, we saw a certain finding, but we're not suggesting that it's associated with their woo woo shit. Like, your arrogance is permeating the field, and I need you to stop. Like, you can just leave it at this doesn't necessarily mean that. But I don't know why, like, scientists get a free pass to be derogatory to fields that they've not actually taken time to understand. And honestly, that's some colonialist bullshit. And I'm calling it out right now. So, yeah, I am not qualified by the colonialist standard, but I have literally been giving people relationship and self help advice ever since I was a child. And um, honestly, take it or leave it. It is self proclaimed, yes, but also proclaimed by like countless people, even long before I had a psychology degree. I've had a very innate understanding of human behavior that has shocked even my own counselors. And like, I'm sorry that not everything is going to be able to be certified by a piece of paper. And don't get me wrong, like professions, like the medical professions or the heart or any other hard science, right? Like I think like engineering, etc. I think that makes sense to require a level of quantifiable training. But therapy is an intuitive practice, whether or not you want to admit it. Like, I'm sorry, it is just not a hard science. It is not something you can contain within a Western framework. And again, to demand that that is the only way by which to determine the ethics and the validity of practicing helping another human being, that is some colonialist bullshit, and you are trying to sell me a capitalist like, yeah, it is just capitalism in action after exploiting my ancestors. That's just what it is. And it is so, I think, again, dehumanizing to clients to suggest that they cannot work with me and decide for themselves whether or not I'm actually going to do them any good. So I'm just going to let you sit with that I think trying to come at therapy, trying to colonize therapy as a discipline, right? Like, that's just what it is. Um, so yeah, and on the at the same, so sorry, just to talk a bit about my background as well, right? Like, so I talk about this a lot like, recently because I've been part of some incredible communities. I've been talking. It's really funny because I have a blog of WordPress, and I actually recently have been treating LinkedIn as more of a blog than anything. Just because I have been trying to face my fear of talking to fellow professionals to overcome my imposter syndrome. Be like, hang on, actually, I am a professional myself. Like, I have enough experience, even if it hasn't been watched over by a qualified, privileged white person, to be like, oh yeah, you're meeting all my standards. Because I think when I speak, my reasonings speak for themselves, really. I don't need to keep going through a white collared person to determine the legitimacy of what I'm saying. Um, but anyhow, yes, recently I have been part of more communities, and I have been a lot more open about my abuse background, and hence why I have seen so many therapists throughout my life. And because I'm obviously Asian, in our heritage, we don't take very kindly to any suggestion that your parents are not basically demigods in a way. So for me, even just being properly validated in my pain by a therapist back in Singapore, um, not very good. So you just end up getting re-traumatized by people parroting unhelpful cultural narratives. Um, and so essentially how I wound up with spirituality, right, was because I literally had no other option. My family wasn't emotionally safe. My schools weren't emotionally safe because we're all embedded in that same culture of saying that adults can do no wrong. My friends also, well, I wouldn't say they weren't safe. My friends were pretty much the reason I've managed to hold on to sanity, really. But even then, there would always be elements of, oh, your parents are still your parents at the end of the day. And it's very traumatizing when you're heavily emotionally abused by all these different elements. Well, you're emotionally abused by this group of people that all these different parts of society keep trying to protect because of culture. And then obviously because of colonization, we don't have access to the same awareness and resources to try and at least update that thinking a little. Because I'm not saying that we shouldn't respect our elders. Like, personally, I like that idea, but that's under the condition that those elders aren't harmful jackasses, because age just doesn't inoculate you against harmful jackassery. I think that's fair to say. So, right, where was I going with this? The only way for me to get to as healed a place that I have now is through spirituality. It is literally through connecting with spirit. And again, who did that upset? If not the colonizers, right? So do you see where I'm going with this? So that's why I am pursuing a spiritual counseling route. And now I am on a course, so I am on my way to becoming qualified, but like, I have noticed through my time practicing that I am honestly very skilled, even before I finish the course. So again, like, I am trying to honor any clients who choose to work with me, that they will know whether or not my type of approach is going to be compatible with them, and whether I as a person have enough integrity to hold that kind of space for them, because it is a very sacred and vulnerable space. Um And at the same time, I'm obviously also extremely aware of the dangers of unregulated professions, of which being a spiritual practitioner is very much one, even less regulated than, counseling, I imagine, because at least counseling is kind of treated as a Western framework and therefore more legitimate because they've got like research and stuff behind it. Whereas, the psychic spiritual realm is kind of really uh uh yeah, it's up for grabs, right, by anybody, and you can very much be from a similar vulnerable place that I started it and be go down a complete and end up in a complete different place from me, because you didn't get to learn about intuition and discernment, and that is something that needs to be addressed. And so one of the projects that I'm working on right now at the moment with a fellow therapist, who is pursuing a mainstream accredited therapy course. I'm not going to give too much detail at the moment because that's something that's still very much in its infancy, but something I'm very excited about is to essentially come up with a sort of ethical framework that can guide anyone who does any kind of helping profession really without the inaccessibility of expecting us to pay hundreds, literally hundreds of thousands, especially if you're not a British local, just to be mainstream accredited. And let's be clear, right? Like one of the biggest bodies in the UK, counseling accrediting bodies is BACB. Just look at their reviews, and let me just make that point that just because you're mainstream doesn't mean you're that ethical yourself. Oh yeah, my neurodivergent brain forgot to complete the thought about how in a psychology related discipline usually you're required to do at least a master's to be determined as competent. So even a bachelor's that costs a non-British local several hundred thousand, still not good enough. And again, mind you, I come from an abusive background. I'm not going to go into too much detail about my financial situation because that is incredibly personal, even in a way that I'm not comfortable with sharing at the moment. But on top of these financial barriers to education, on top of the fact that I had very late access to autism diagnosis, which in itself is already an immense privilege because I think if I stayed in Singapore, I don't know if I would have ever been diagnosed with autism. But also because of I don't have the privilege of an emotionally supportive background, I'm also up against, not only am I up against people who have the privilege to be mainstream accredited in essentially an echo chamber of people who look often like themselves, I'm also up against the mental conditioning of not being good enough, that like there's no point in me trying to change things, that my work does not speak for itself because one of the things I was raised to believe is that I have no worth and that I will never find success. So it's almost like the expectation is that I keep myself out of work because I didn't have all these privileges, even though I have very much lived experience of both being on the receiving end of therapy and therapizing people that, ideally I shouldn't have had to, but I ended up doing anyway. So that's just something I want you guys to take into consideration, like the expectations we have of people from these minoritized backgrounds to have to, I don't know what the word is, subjugate, I guess, to larger systems, literally to the detriment of their own health and survival. And that's why I have stopped. Like, I can't keep pushing myself through this system when I already know I am so capable. I think it's ridiculous to expect me to keep following these standards that I also know is bullshit. And I also think that's a complete lack of integrity if I were to do that. So yeah, that's where I'm at. This is me being transparent. I do actually have a lot of testimonials that I've just not posted. But yeah, I mean, again, let my work speak for itself. Read my posts on LinkedIn if you can be bothered. See the other things I've said on Instagram, and then decide for yourself. Do I seem like a sound person to work with? And if the answer is no, then don't do it. So yeah, that's me pitching myself, I suppose. That's my marketing.